Good evening. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, and this is your mid-May 2026 Federal Crime Report. Tonight, a catastrophic cargo ship disaster tied to the collapse of Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge now leads to criminal indictments involving foreign corporations and allegations of cover-ups. Federal prosecutors across the Southeast are also cracking down on fentanyl trafficking networks, violent gang activity, child exploitation crimes, massive fraud conspiracies, international money laundering operations, illegal firearm trafficking, and transnational organization crimes connected to illegal immigration. From Maryland to Florida, we break down the biggest federal prosecutions unfolding right now in the United States District Courts. This is Englebrook Independent News Federal Crime Report. We begin tonight in Maryland. Federal prosecutors in Maryland have unsealed a sweeping criminal indictment tied to March 2024 collapse of the Baltimore Francis Scott Key Bridge, a disaster that killed 6 construction workers and caused estimated $5 billion in economic damages. Authorities say 2 foreign ship corporations, one based in Singapore, another headquartered in India, along with technical superintendents overseeing the vessel, are now facing federal conspiracy and obstruction charges. According to prosecutors, the 900-foot cargo vessel known as the MV Dali suffered repeat power failure before slamming into the bridge. Investigators allege a loose wire in the high voltage switchboard triggered the first blackout. But prosecutors claim company officials had previously altered the vessel's fuel supply system in ways that disabled critical automatic restart protection. Federal authorities allege the ship properly relied on flushing pump systems that could not automatically restart after a blackout, ultimately leaving the vessel powerless as it approached the bridge. The indictment further accused the defendant of misleading federal investigators and of providing false statements to the National Transportation Safety Board during the aftermath investigation. The corporate entities also face environmental charges tied to pollutant discharge in the Panasaco River, including oil, shipment containers, and bridge debris. An illegal alien from El Salvador connected to the violent MS-13 gang has been sentenced in Maryland for his role in a brutal murder of a minor. Federal prosecutors say 26-year-old Jose Ramos Lopez participated in an MS-13 racketeering enterprise operating in Frederick, Maryland. According to court filings, gang members lured the victim into a wooded area before stabbing and hacking the victim to death using knives and machetes. Authorities say the victim's body was later dismantled and buried in conical graves. Prosecutors state Ramos Lopez assisted with the cleaning of the murder scene and disposing of bloody weapons and clothing. Federal investigators later discovered blood trails, blood-covered rocks, discarded clothes, and knives tied to the killing. Ramos Lopez was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Federal court in Maryland also handed down multiple major narcotic and firearm sentencing this week. 37-year-old Dominic McCall of Lexington Park received more than 9 years in prison after investigators uncovered nearly 1,000 fentanyl pills, cocaine, marijuana, loaded firearms, and a ghost gun during a narcotic investigation. Authorities recovered thousands of dollars in cash and government benefit cards in other people's names. Meanwhile, Baltimore County felon Jack Hammer Brown pled guilty to fentanyl trafficking and illegal firearm possession after DEA agents seized more than 500 grams of fentanyl, drug presses, scales, and firearms from his Raleigh-town residence. Brown now faces a minimum of 10 years and up to life in prison. A former Maryland police officer has been sentenced to nearly 6 years in federal prison in connection with an insurance fraud, arson, and bank fraud conspiracies. Federal prosecutors say former Fairmont Heights officer Philip Dupree worked alongside former Prince George County officer to stage vehicle fires, submitted fake police reports, and orchestrated fraudulent reimbursement schemes. One conspiracy involved intentionally burning a Ford F-450 truck, experiencing mechanical problems before filing false reports to collect insurance payments exceeding $68,000. Authorities also uncovered fraudulent ATM reimbursement schemes involving fabricated police reports and fake debit card claims. The case highlights growing federal scrutiny involving corruption and fraud within the law enforcement ranks. Federal prosecutors in West Virginia continue to dismantle fentanyl and methamphetamine trafficking pipelines tied to Detroit-based drug suppliers. 2 Michigan men have been sentenced to operating a narcotic network distributing methamphetamine and fentanyl in the Harrison County. Authorities say Taryn Gordon and Devon Thompson sourced narcotics from Detroit before funneling them into Shinston, West Virginia. Gordon received 14 years in prison, while Thompson received over 3 years. Federal prosecutors say additional co-defendants have either already been sentenced or remain awaiting sentencing. Federal investigators dismantled a major drug trafficking organization responsible for distributing fentanyl, methamphetamine, crack cocaine, and other narcotics across north central West Virginia. Federal authorities say 23 out of 25 defendants have now been sentenced to a combined 196 years in prison. During the investigations, officers seized firearms, cash, fentanyl, methamphetamine, crack cocaine, and extensive drug paraphernalia. A Huntington woman has been sentenced to 6 years in prison after investigators conducted 7 separate controlled fentanyl buys tied to her operation. Authorities say Tabitha Gardner sold fentanyl from her residence in Huntington while storing narcotics and nearly $19,000 in drug proceeds inside her home. Her mother and co-defendant have previously sentenced in the same federal investigation. Meanwhile, in Charleston, 66-year-old Joe Schleider was convicted following a bench trial after surveillance footage allegedly showed him repeatedly smashing a federal building access scanner with a metal pole. Federal prosecutors say the damage totaled approximately $1,800. He faces up to 10 years in prison at sentencing. In Virginia, a former administrator overseeing Virginia's state employee charity program has been sentenced after stealing more than $1.5 million intended for nonprofit organizations. Federal prosecutors say Linda Natalia Brown embezzled funds from Virginia's Commonwealth Campaign Charity Program over a 4-year period. Investigators say Brown diverted employee donations for personal luxury spending, including cosmetic surgery procedures, vacation, luxury hotels, designer goods, alcohol purchases, and spa treatments. Authorities also say Brown attempted to conceal the theft by fraudulently obtaining nearly a half a million SBA-backed loans. She received 4 years in federal prison. A Chesapeake, Virginia man has been sentenced to 17 years in prison after traveling to the Philippines to engage in sexual activity with a 14-year-old child. Federal investigators say Dylan Narr communicated with victims online through video chats and sexually explicit messages traveling overseas. Authorities later intercepted Narr during another attempted international trip. A Winchester man received 30 months in prison after federal investigators uncovered thousands of threatening social media posts directed to former Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Barack Obama. Authorities say Frank Lucio Corralio posted online statements referencing loaded firearms and violent threats against public officials. FBI agents later seized AR-15 rifle, a handgun, and thousands of rounds of ammunition from his home. Federal prosecutors also announced the sentencing of Terman Burford, who orchestrated a fentanyl trafficking operation while incarcerated inside the Lynchburg Adult Detention Center. Investigators say Burford directed family members and associates outside the jail to distribute tens of thousands of fentanyl pills throughout the Lynchburg area. Even after his conviction, authorities say Burford attempted to bribe a correctional officers to smuggle in Suboxone into the jail. He received more than 21 years in federal prison. In Tennessee, federal prosecutors announced a 20-year prison sentence for a Morristown woman tied to multiple fentanyl overdose deaths. Authorities say Ashlyn Jade Henry distributed fentanyl-laced cocaine that killed at least 3 victims and nearly killed 2 others. Surviving overdose victims identified Henry as the supplier. Federal prosecutors also wrap up a major COVID-era fraud prosecution involving millions of dollars in fraudulent tax credit claims. Authorities say defendants created at least 11 fake businesses to illegally obtain employee retention credit and pandemic tax relief funds. The conspiracy fraudulently sought more than $3.4 million and successfully obtained approximately $1.8 million from the IRS. The final defendant in the case was sentenced this week to more than 5 years in prison. One of the largest federal gang investigations announced in the month came from Nashville, where Homeland Security Task Force agents charged multiple suspects tied to the firearm trafficking and narcotic distribution. Federal prosecutors say several defendants may be connected to Tende Aguagra, the Venezuelan transnational criminal organization designed by the United States as a foreign terrorist organization in 2025. Authorities say the group trafficked firearms, methamphetamine, cocaine, MDMA, ketamine, and other narcotics across multiple states. Investigators seized 25 firearms, including weapons linked through ballistic evidence to violent shooting in Nashville. Federal authorities also allege multiple defendants were illegally presented in the United States. Federal courts in North Carolina announced multiple lengthy prison sentencing involving child sexual abuse material investigation. 35-year-old Daniel Tyroff received 17 and a half years after investigators discovered hundreds of child sexual abuse files linked to his Kik social media account and electronic devices. Meanwhile, registered sex offender James Patrick McGraw was sentenced to another 17 and a half years after investigators uncovered disturbing child exploitation files involving children as young as 8 years old. Authorities say McGraw admitted being sexually interested in underage girls. In Charlotte, 40-year-old Ash Kane received more than 21 years in prison after producing and distributing child sexual abuse material involving a prepubescent child. Federal prosecutors also secured a 50-year sentence against Homer Allen Faison III, identified as the leader of a major methamphetamine trafficking network spanning from California and eastern North Carolina. Authorities say Faison trafficked at least 220 pounds of methamphetamine between 2020 and 2023. 10 defendants were charged in the conspiracy. In Mississippi, a federal SNAP benefit fraud investigation has now resulted in a guilty plea from three siblings. Christopher Hill admitted to stealing more than $116,000 in supplement nutrition assistance programs benefits through unauthorized access allegedly tied to his sister's employment with the EBT processing contractor. Federal prosecutors say the fraud extorted benefits intended for low-income families. A former gymnastics coach pled guilty to producing child sexual abuse materials after secretly recording children inside a gym bathroom in Purvis, Mississippi. Federal investigators say hidden camera footage dated back years involving multiple minor victims. Authorities launched the investigation after complaints were forwarded through the U.S. Center of Safe Sport. A Homeland Security task force operated involved 19 defendants officially concluded this week after another defendant pled guilty in a federal court. Authorities seized more than 25 kilograms of cocaine, over $150,000 in cash, and multiple vehicles during the investigation. Several defendants have already received federal prison sentencing, while others remain awaiting sentencing. Federal courts in Alabama announced several of the harshest sentencing this month involving crimes against children. 31-year-old Magnus Clark was sentenced to 36 years in prison after admitting to distributing child sexual abuse material through Snapchat and Kik. Authorities discovered more than 1,000 videos and hundreds of images during a forensic examination. Meanwhile, Caleb Wheeler received a staggering 160 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of sexual exploitation of children. Federal prosecutors also secured the statutory maximum sentence against Xavier Maxey for her role in a multi-million-dollar mobile-based drug trafficking organization. Investigators say the organization distributed hundreds of pounds of cocaine and tens of thousands of fentanyl pills. Authorities intercepted phone calls and converted surveillance videos allegedly showing family members directing a child to dispose a loaded firearm before federal agents arrived. Maxey received 20 years in federal prison. Two defendants were also sentenced in connection of a decade-long identity theft and bank fraud conspiracy spanning multiple states. Federal investigators say the conspirators used stolen identities, counterfeit checks, fake businesses, and fraudulent money orders to steal millions of dollars from banks nationwide. Authorities uncovered counterfeit stations, fake IDs, stolen mail, and fraudulent financial records during the raid. Federal prosecutors in Georgia announced charges against a German national accused of laundering millions of dollars connected to a notorious dark net marketplace known as Dream Market. Authorities allege O. Martin Anderson operated using the alias Speed Stepper, believed to be the platform's primary administrator. Dream Market was one of the largest criminal marketplaces on the darknet before it shut down in 2019. Federal authorities say the market facilitated trafficking involving heroin, cocaine, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and other narcotics using cryptocurrency and encrypted internet services. Investigators allege Anderson later accessed dormant cryptocurrency wallets tied to the marketplace and used the funds to purchase gold bars shipped to Germany. Authorities reportedly recovered millions of dollars in gold, cash, and cryptocurrency assets during the coordinated raid. Federal prosecutors also announced guilty pleas tied to firearm trafficking schemes involving straw purchase and illegal aliens. Authorities say multiple firearm purchases in Georgia were later intercepted near the Mexican border while allegedly being smuggled into Mexico. Investigators also accused one defendant of lying under oath in immigration court to help his wife, an illegal alien, avoid detention after she was caught processing firearms at a Georgia gun range. Federal authorities sentenced several defendants tied to a transnational drug trafficking and money laundering organization operating between Mexico and Georgia. Investigators say the network laundered more than $1 million in narcotics proceeds through wire transfer and money service businesses. Several defendants are expected to face deportation after serving federal prison sentences. In South Carolina, a former Hannah City councilman and mayor pro tem now face sweeping federal child exploitation charges. Federal prosecutors allege Kevin Hedgepeth used social media applications including Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Telegram, and X to target minors while pretending to be a child himself. Authorities say Hedgepeth presumed minors to produce explicit material and distribute those files online. Investigators allege at least 19 victims ranging from 12 to 17 years old were exploited during the scheme. He remains detained pending trial and faces possible life imprisonment. A former Tennessee sheriff deputy also pled guilty after as posing online as a 14-year-old boy to solicitate sexual explicit material from 13-year-old South Carolina girl. Federal agents later recovered electronic devices tying the defendant directly to the online account and communication. Authorities in South Carolina also announced major cocaine trafficking sentencing after investigators seized nearly 60 kilograms of cocaine and more than $400,000 in cash. 42-year-old Gerald Larson received more than 12 years in prison. Federal prosecutors in Florida announced a major immigration enforcement push involving numerous illegal re-entry prosecutions. 14 previously deported illegal aliens were indicted across northern Florida during April alone. Many defendants had prior removal dating back years, while some had already been deported multiple times. Federal authorities say the prosecutions are part of Operation Take Back America. Federal prosecutors also announced guilty pleas tied to violent postal robberies in Gainesville and Oklahoma. Authorities say Atral Hillard and co-conspirators targeted postal workers to steal master postal keys used in mail delivery systems. One robbery allegedly involved physical ripping of a postal key from a carrier's belt. Federal court across Florida also announced multiple child exploitation prosecutions this week. Anthony Larner pled guilty after allegedly attempting to entice what he believed was a child online before arriving to meet a location where undercover officers arrested him. Meanwhile, Trinity Joy Johnson faces 23 federal counts tied to child pornography production, distribution, and possession. Federal prosecutors in Gainesville also announced guilty pleas and indictments involving narcotic trafficking and illegal machine gun conversion devices. Authorities say defendants were trafficking marijuana, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, and illegal firearm modification capable of converting weapons into automatic machine guns. From transnational gang networks and fentanyl trafficking operations to public corruption, child exploitation, cybercrime, and violent organized criminal enterprises, federal investigators across the Southeast continue to pursue some of the nation's most serious criminal cases. For continued coverage of federal courts, Homeland Security Task Force investigation, organized crime prosecution, and nation's public safety developments, stay with Englebrook Independent News. I'm Haylee Ficuciello. Thank you for watching. Good night.